People will remember what you said and how you made them feel when you take over a company. And it's super important when you take over a company that you know the current ownership and what is called the key men, the few people inside of the organization who drive the culture within the organization. 3 and probably 8 people at the company that are core. Each of these individuals is somebody that you have to go get buy-in from.
Well, welcome to the show, Codie. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Johnny and I were sharing a little bit before the show how many of our clients have expressed frustration in their 9-to-5 and sometimes even looked up to us in our entrepreneurial journey, as we've shared on the show, but they do feel trapped. And I know that's a big part of the book. A big reason for writing the book is the 9-to-5 trap. So how did that impact you early on in your career, and how did you leap out of the trap?
Yeah, I was actually a wuss. I worked in my 9-to-5 for like 12 years. I could never make the jump. I never had a brilliant idea for a business. I was the definition of golden handcuffs. And I tried a few little things on the side. I did all the side hustling, and none of that ever actually made me that much money. And most of it just lost me money over the course. And so eventually I realized that maybe my purpose wasn't to start a business. I've been in finance for a long time. So I was like, these guys seem to take other people's money, aka LBOs, leverage buyouts, loans, and they use it to buy businesses that already exist so they don't have to come up with any brilliant ideas. And then they cash flow off of those businesses and they make the businesses better over time. And I was like, I don't think that seems like rocket science. It actually seems harder to me to think about starting a brand new business and making sure people wanted it. And so that's sort of how my journey got started. Was I was buying these little businesses on the side, sort of like you would real estate. And then finally, it kind of snuck up on me, and I'm like, I'm making more in this than my main business. And maybe this is a path that I probably should have started earlier.
Well, I think in hearing that, a lot of our audience members think, wow, buying a business, you must be really successful. You must have a giant pocketbook to start. Walk us through the initial buying of businesses that you had, these smaller businesses, while you had a full-time job.
Yeah, the biggest thing that people do not want you to know when it comes to Wall Street is that you do not need them to buy businesses. This is my overall crux, is that actually Main Street is perfectly capable of existing without Wall Street. And that in fact, the way we used to transition businesses was through apprenticeship. So back in the day, if you had a business, 80% of the US, for instance, was self-employed in the 1800s. 80%. Now we are down to less than 6%, depending on you categorize it in the US. And we're bad at it because even the Canadians are beating us. They have like 7.8% of ownership in Canada. And so we used to own our own business. And then we had big corporations come in. We had intermediaries, aka banks, come in. And we basically made the model less accessible. And we allowed a few people to own everything. And I think these days, even with how crazy it is in the world and how much we fight each other, red versus blue, whatever, we can all agree that it's better when we have skin in the game ourselves. And that probably we don't want the big companies to own everything. And in fact, it'd be a little bit better if our neighborhood was owned by neighbors. That's not like a shocking idea that is one side or the other. And so what I like to pitch to people is this idea that what if you don't have to have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to buy a business. And in fact, you don't need anywhere close to that. You've just been sold that you need it. And so I've bought businesses for $8,000. I've bought businesses for $0 and just my sweat equity. So me growing the business. And because I grew the business, I got a percentage of the business. I've taught other people how to take over the business that they work in, like Jade, who took over her government contracting business from the owner who was 65, trained for 3 years, transitioned the business over to her for no money, and continued to give royalties to the guy until he retires in 10 years. And so I just think this is something we should have been taught, but we weren't, because Wall Street and many other big power organizations like to be in the middle. There's a perverse incentive.
There's a lot of forces at work there that I'd love to unpack, because many of us feel like the path to true success is through the 9-to-5, is working really hard in school, getting that advanced degree, then working your way up the ranks. And yet so many people right now, especially clients that we work with, are feeling really stretched economically, even though they've checked all of those boxes.
Yeah, let's think about it for a second. We have allowed our educational institutions to become a place where students go to. They rack up $30, $50, $60,000 in debt. We know that universities, by and large, have gotten more expensive every year and given less outsized performance to students every year, aka salary increases. And then, oh, by the way, these institutions don't allow you to bankrupt your way out of that debt. So we carry this $30,000, $50,000 over our head for the rest of our youth. I mean, we had an employee at this company whose name was Nikki. She's incredibly talented. And she had more than $100,000 in debt at 27 years old because she went to undergrad and then grad school, and she continued to stack that debt with interest. And that's very hard to get out from under $120,000 when you're making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. And so I think we were sold a huge lie there that used to be true, but no longer is. And when we start allowing our tax dollars to go to institutions that have pensions larger than anyone else in the country and make our students enslaved by it, I think there is something really nasty going on. And so that said, I went to Georgetown. So you might say like, well, Codie, cute, but like you did it. I also went to Arizona State University, really Harvard of the West for undergrad, one might say. And I went to Georgetown, but my company paid for it. And I wish that I had taken that $130K or whatever it costs to get an executive degree and put it into businesses instead. I think college is great for learning, maybe when you're undergrad. I think MBAs are ridiculous. The best business school is being in business.
Yeah, part of that is by the time you complete the advanced degree, oftentimes you may have started a family, you may have bought a piece of real estate, and then the amount of pressure on you to earn not only the debt that you've carried from that advanced degree really puts you in a situation where you don't feel you have the flexibility to sleep on a couch, eat old pizza, and start a business and ideate and try to come up with ways to work this new internet economy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, and, to be fair, startups are miserable. I mean, we've all had them. So, it takes a certain type of masochist to go pay for the privilege of potential future profit, right? It's hard. Let's be honest about that. I had many failed attempts, and it's not just the money that sucks, it's the time that sucks. And then it's when you fail, that's like an identity shift that happens. It's hard and it's scary. And so I have a lot of respect for the people who are crazy enough to want to do the wild startup thing. I think it's beautiful. But for most people, they don't start a company because they would die if the next succulent company didn't exist on the planet. They start the accounting startup because they want to make money. And so I actually just want to look for, where do you have the highest likelihood of success? You don't have to be the most brilliant. You don't have to be the richest. You don't have to be the most knowledgeable. You just play a game that has a higher probability of you winning. It's like why one might play poker as opposed to slot machines. You know that one has a higher likelihood of you winning if you are experienced and skilled. And buying businesses that are profitable just has a higher likelihood of success. And then you might be like, I don't know, Codie, how could you quantify that? And I would say, well, what would seem reasonable to me is let's look at the average startup, 90% failure rate over a 10-year period. The average startup doesn't make money for the first 3 to 4 years. The average entrepreneur or founder's salary in the US is about $67,000 a year. Not nothing, but not huge. And then you compare that to, let's say, the SBA loan failure rate for buying a business, which at its height is 25%, which means that you have a 75% success rate in buying a business and a 25% failure rate. And even if you said that that was too low and it is not completely representative, which could be a decent argument because there are things called workouts that banks have, even if you say that, what is it, 30, 35%? Well, that is still materially better than the likelihood you have of succeeding in a startup. And so that's my pushback, is like, let's just go where the game is most likely to be a game that you can play and win.
I know for us in starting up the company, we had to wear a ton of different hats and learn new skills on the fly, build the plane while you're flying it, save ourselves from a few crashes. And with that, make a lot of mistakes in hiring the wrong people and choosing outside consultants versus an existing business, which, quite honestly, as we see generationally, boomers are now passing on these businesses. They haven't quite caught up to the internet age and understood how to market and access new customers, but they have the basic mechanics handled. They have staff, they have assets, they have a proven model, and they have customers that ideally you could turn into repeat customers. So the skill set necessary for a startup seems vast, And I think that's why many people don't have the stomach maybe to jump in, whereas buying a business, you have to have some skills for sure, but really lean into, as you call, your zone of genius to maximize that opportunity versus wearing many hats and learning every tool.
Yeah, I think the cool part about buying a business is that when it comes to startups, why do most startups fail? Well, more like 60% of startups fail because of lack of product market fit, right? Which means like you had an idea, all your friends said that's a great idea, and then none of those friends bought your thing, right? Which we've all been there. And then the second biggest reason startups fail is lack of cash, which basically means like you didn't have enough time to find your product market fit. So if we know that 60 to 70% of the reasons startups fail are those two things, well, if we already have a business where people have been paying for the product for 3, 5, 10 years, and there's cash flow to cover costs, wow, we've really decreased our risk. And I guess that's sort of how I think about entrepreneurship is because I'm a wuss, it's like, where do I have a higher likelihood to not become a failure at this? And it's actually very bizarre because if you were to say to a group of people, hey, what's riskier, starting a business or buying a business? People would immediately go, buying a business, because it's like you're putting money down. You don't know what you're doing. We're not taught how to do it. But if you were to say, what's riskier, building a house or buying a house? You'd be like, oh, building it. I like that. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to build that. It takes a lot of time. It's always over budget. And so I think if the key could be, if there's a massive supply glut, so there's way more businesses that are looking to be sold than there are buyers looking to buy or that know how to buy, that means that we have an opportunity to pair the baby boomer generation, who owns 60% of all businesses, with the younger generations who are for the first time ever making less than their parents were at 30 years old, and flip the script. And instead of us hating each other as two different generations, instead of us saying, okay, boomer, and shut up with your quiet quitting millennial, we can say, you don't have a retirement plan. I can take over your business and be your retirement plan and pay you a little bit out over time. And you hate your job like 85% of Americans do. Why don't you become the boss and see if you can grow the business that way? And the only caveat I have here, or I guess there's lots of caveats, which is why you write a book about it. But the caveat is you got to make sure you buy the right business for you. And really a lot like real estate, you got to make sure that you understand how to do a deal. Because if you do a bad first deal, then you'll think that buying businesses is bad, not that you just didn't know how to buy a business yet.
One of our favorite taglines is, especially in entrepreneurship, leap and the net will appear. Meaning put yourself in a position where you have to rely on your resourcefulness, and you'd be surprised how quickly you could build that net instead of crashing. And unfortunately, for a lot of our clients and a lot of listeners, they wait until the net is fully built. They feel like they have to get their credentials, they have to complete their degree, they have to get the skill set, prove that they know what they're doing before they actually take that risk, and that leaves them on the sideline. But then when we hop on social media and we look at all the flashy stuff going on, odds are the people behind those flashy accounts, they're owners. They're not working for someone else. They've understood the ownership mindset. So what are some of those mindset hurdles before we even get to the research and finding the business that you find keep people on the sidelines afraid to go out and buy a business?
Yeah, it's such a good point. At first, I don't know if you guys are similar, but since I had kind of done the thing for a long time, I was like, shut up about your inspiration. I don't need to walk on coals. I don't need your quotes on the board or the wall. Like, just tell me how to do the thing and like save your story. And then after taking 3,000 students through how to buy a business, I realized, actually, the biggest reason we don't do something typically is ourselves and our limiting beliefs. And that's why so many people talk about this, because it's not just inspiration. It's how do we get somebody to a point of actually believing in themselves? And so we added a whole chapter on owner mindset and this idea of how does an individual start to think like an owner? And some of the things I think are most important is really first and foremost, when you can steal somebody else's 10,000 hours, you do it. When you can get something that pays you long-term, aka cash flow, you don't worry about price, you worry about value and return. So I guess it's a little bit like, listen, if you're gonna go buy a business, what would be the fastest way to learn how to buy a business? Well, you'd want to go steal somebody's 10,000 hours. You might buy a book, you might want to watch a bunch of YouTube videos, but you want to see, where did somebody else lose money so that I can steal their money-losing lessons and I don't have to repeat them. And then the second part is you'd want to really surround yourself with a group of owners who've already done the thing that you want. I call this get in a room where other people's Tuesday is your dream day. And the idea is simply this, when you hang out with a bunch of CrossFitters and they get up early and they eat their like chicken or whatever CrossFitters eat, and they go work out twice and they sauna and they hang out together and they don't drink, guess what? You're probably a lot more likely to be fit when you hang out with that group of people because that is their Tuesday. It's the same with buying a business or becoming an owner. You want to get with a group of people who are already doing the thing that you want to do. And so I think proximity is real power. And that's why it wasn't enough for us to just write the book or just have a newsletter. We wanted to have a community that went with it too, because I was too scared probably to go try to buy a business by myself. I needed a few people around me in investing. We call this your investment committee. I needed a group of people around a table who would tell me that's a bad deal, that's a good deal, and here's why we're doing it. And so my idea was we're not just going to help people buy businesses. We're going to create a community of people who are all doing the same thing.
Codie, for our listeners who are interested and not sure where to get started, what would be some of the basic skills that they should be looking to acquire to make this work for themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, in the book, we have something called RICH, which is just an easy acronym for you to remember. Starts off with research. So before you do a deal, knowledge is power. You want to try to cram your cranium full of as much information as possible on how do you get a deal done. The most important part of research, in my mind, there's 10 steps to buying a business, all the way from, hey, there's an opportunity, to doing due diligence, to how do I get money for my deal? How do I make time to do a deal? How do I structure it? How do I find that bad boy? To how do I close the deal and then run it? So that's all in the research segment. The second part, we actually want you to think about investing. So, okay, you've read the book, you've gotten with a community of people. Now you got to put your money where your mouth is. Your money might be your time, it could be your expertise, or it could be actual capital or other people's capital. But you want to start doing what we said in the beginning, which is the best business school is being in business. The best way to learn how to do deals is to do some deals. And so that would be the second portion. Then the command segment comes in. And command is when you really learn how to scale a business. And so that's like, okay, I bought the thing, now what? So how do we scale up a business? How do we make it profitable? And how do we run the business and not have the business run us? And then the last step is harness. And harness is basically for the pros. This is like, all right, I bought my first business, or I already own a business, and I'm going to strategically acquire a few more. I'm going to do add-on acquisitions. And I put that part in the book because I wanted a chapter that was like, you can't be what you can't see. So I wanted people to be able to see into the future of what it looks like if you use acquisitions intelligently. I happen to think that acquisitions is the best leverage point you can use. You cannot find a Fortune 100 company who has gotten there that has done zero acquisitions. It does not exist. And so if the really, really rich are doing it, that's probably a pretty good indicator that we should learn what that skill set is.
I know for us in our first acquisition, we were largely hoping to gain the IP. And it seemed like a slam dunk. But what we didn't actually realize with the acquisition is the people that came with it and having those team members who develop the IP and bring them on board. And I think a lot of times when we look at all these pieces around growing businesses or starting businesses or trying to purchase businesses, we don't often see how all the pieces fit together because we just have that one vantage point. And that's why I love the idea of being around a community who has seen all those different puzzle pieces click together, and you can have that inspiration from others to be like, oh, okay, that's where that piece clicks in, and oh, I can actually add on this other part to my business now that I have an existing customer base that are rabid for this other thing if I acquire the business.
It's such a good point. It's, one of the funny parts about acquisitions is like once you see it, you can't unsee it. I call it your matrix moment. So then, it's kind of like when you start a business, every time you are in a business that's in your same area, you're like, I wonder why they don't upsell you there. Wow, that price is kind of low. You know what? The guy up front, he wasn't very welcoming. I wouldn't do that at my restaurant. So it's like you start to recognize all around you opportunities. And one of the big opportunities you hit on is acqui-hiring. So buying companies to acquire the talent inside of the company. We actually did that in this business in our video production company. Like I wanted to grow on YouTube. I don't know anything about YouTube. I'm kind of a finance nerd. And so I was like, how do these young kids, grow all these YouTube followings? And so I worked with a few vendors. I really liked one vendor. And I was like, hey, would you listen, what do you make right now? do you want to be part of a bigger vision where you could make way more than that and also be included in a company, not be kind of by yourself on an island? And so we acqui-hired this guy's company and 3 employees with it. And so he gets a cool acquisition. He gets to say, I exited my company, and then I get 3 new employees. What was the acquisition you guys did?
So we acquired another coaching company that was focused on mindset. And originally, he was tired of running the business. He had basically built a team, but he had outgrown it. And he was like, hey, I kind of have this thing. I'm looking to do something else. And we looked at the course and the materials. And we're like, wow, this would actually be really supportive of what we're trying to do. We haven't spent a lot of time on the mindset piece, much like you were saying earlier. We kind of shoved that to the side. We're very tactical, strategic guys. So we're like, all right, let's just get in there. But we saw some of those clients on the sideline never getting to the tactics and strategies because they were wrestling with the limiting beliefs. So when we actually acquired the business, I was excited to plug in the IP. And then I was like, wait a second, you have a couple coaches who've been running this training with tens of thousands of happy customers and they co-developed it. And they're also great writers. Well, what are they going to be doing after we acquire them? And it's like, they could just work for us. And it kind of dawned on us. And that was our very first acquisition. And it was like, now I start to see the matrix, as you said. You start to see the bigger pieces. And a lot of times we just look at businesses as numbers on a spreadsheet, and we don't think about all the hidden assets below the numbers that you can leverage with your skill set, your customers, your existing business that could really be that rocket fuel for you.
It's so smart. Yeah, I mean, I think the best owners of businesses do acquisitions. That's sort of like the 303 level. So I think, level 1 operators or level one people who even think about money. They think, I have a problem. How do I solve it? Level 2 is like, I have a problem. Who can solve it? Level 3 is, I have a problem. How can I buy an almost certain likelihood of solving this problem? Which is where acquisitions come into play. And the moment that I thought that way, my life sort of changed. It was either maybe I was actually buying time with consultants, or maybe I was buying the entire consultant's business, or maybe I was buying software to integrate into my business. And so I think, there's like 5 different ways I think of acquisitions adding value to individuals. The most common way people think about it is income. I buy a business because I want to make money. And that is one way. But you can also buy a business because you want more customers. You could also buy a business because you want talent. You could also buy a business because you want to vertically integrate. You actually want to increase the profitability of your business by doing more things inside of your business. You could also do an acquisitions because you have competitors that you want to squash, and instead of beating them, you buy them. So there's so many reasons why to learn the game of deal making, but I think it still is intimidating to people, which is why I won't shut up about it on the internet, I suppose.
Well, along with that intimidating factor, I think a lot of people who are in the 9-to-5 feel safe. Maybe they don't feel they're earning as much as they could, but there is a lot of safety in I punch in at 9, I punch out at 5, I have my weekends back, and then they see the startup, which seems to be the more predominant view of entrepreneurship, is starting from zero, and they just see all the hours spent, the sweat equity, the time spent away from family, and it intimidates them from getting in the game and really making the transition to ownership mindset.
Yeah, well, I think we should be honest with people. If you want to achieve something big, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast. You're not going to be able to do it in a 4-hour work week. And if that's what you want, we're probably not your people. I do think, though, that being an owner is not easy, but it is worth it. And even if you don't want to leave your W-2 and be an employee, I actually think that's fine. Some of the richest people I know are private equity partners. They don't run the joint, and they make more money than any quote unquote CEO or founder who's all over Twitter, including me. Some of these guys make tens and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year working in somebody else's business. But what's the catch? They know how to get equity ownership in deals. And so my recommendation for people is it doesn't mean you have to go be the person who is in charge at the end of the day. You don't actually have to do that. What you do need to understand the language of money, because that way you can learn how when your company that you're at is talking to you about salary negotiations, how can I negotiate for a higher percentage cut in what I do? You can talk to the small businesses that you work with and say, hey, I don't want to work with you full time. I'm happy in my corporate job. But if I helped you increase your revenue or decrease your costs over here, could I get a pro rata percentage of what I give your business in equity for me? Would that be possible? And so again, it opens up this matrix of opportunities where you're going to start seeing deals all around you. And, I always make the joke that Sheryl Sandberg as a W-2 employee is more valuable than just about any of us. And yet she knew to get equity. She knew to get warrants and options. She knew the language of money. And so I want that for more people, even if they don't want to put their name as CEO on the door.
Yeah, and they don't have to leave the W-2. So we started this business. Johnny and I had real jobs. We were doing W-2, and this was on the side. And then all of a sudden, as it started to catch momentum and we started to gain followers and clients, it was like, oh, now the math is shifting. And actually, if I spend more time on this, I make way more than I do in my W-2. But unfortunately, a lot of people see it as like, I'm making the leap and I'm giving up the W-2 for good. And that leads them to never make the leap at all.
Exactly. I think the travesty of you have to do one thing, you have to go all in, or you are not committed is complete and utter survivorship bias. That is told to you by people who were the 10%. They slept on floors. They lived miserably for a while. They barely made it. And so they tell you that that is the only way to make it. And I think anytime somebody tells you that is the only way to make it, that just means that they're very much in their own sphere. They can't see their own biases. I have made money in lots of different ways. My first $1 million was an employee. I made my first $1 million working for somebody else. Anybody can do the exact same thing if you have a higher enough skill set. But the point that I'm making is at some point, you want to figure out how to get paid when you're not working. And the only way to do that is not some passive income mailbox money bullshit. It is to figure out how to get equity and equity that distributes some cash or capital. And so I'm with you guys. I think it's one of my biggest pushbacks, even with my internet entrepreneur friends, because a lot of us, I'm probably one of the only people in my friend groups on the internet that talk a lot about businesses that worked for big corporations for like 10 plus years. I worked for Goldman and State Street and Vanguard and these huge behemoths. And did I work at them for too long? Probably. I probably should have left a little bit earlier. But they also paid me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, if not millions at certain points. And they also spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training me. And so I could take that money and do smart things with it, which is a great thing to do. So I'm the opposite of the jump all in, the water's warm. I'm more like let me tiptoe in a little bit. And then once I've made enough money to cover my costs, I'll go up to my hips,
So Codie, what are some of the indicators that our clients that our listeners could use to identify some promising business acquisitions that others might overlook?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you want to do if you don't know which type of business to buy, but you want a business, is remember this rule, which is we don't buy hopes and dreams. We buy profits and realities. And so please don't buy a turnaround business. Don't buy a business that isn't making money today because you think you're brilliant and you're going to make the business make money. That's a great way to lose your shirt. The second rule in buying businesses is that you always want to make sure your first deal can't bankrupt you. And so I like to start with smaller deals. And the reason I like to start with smaller deals is because then I learn the muscle of deal making and I can turn around and sell a business later. These are sellable assets, but at least I don't have some crushing weight of debt on top of me if I've never ran a business before. And then the third rule of buying businesses for the first time is you're already learning the game of acquisitions. Try to do it in an industry where you have an unfair advantage. So if you're an accountant, maybe you're buying an accounting business. If you're a landscaper, maybe you're buying a landscaping business. If you're a graphic designer or marketer, maybe you're buying a business that needs some marketing component. And so that can be your unfair advantage to it. So I like to say first, it's not about what type of business to buy. It's about leveraging who you are and avoiding the main reasons why businesses fail. There's I could rapid fire 10 businesses that I really like right now. There's also in the book a big appendix of a bunch of lists and tools and calculators because I'm a little bit of a spreadsheet nerd. I like to see it graphically. I want to see exactly how much I'm going to make and exactly how much it's going to cost me. And I don't want you to explain it to me. I want to look at it. And in the book, there's a list of 130 businesses I like to buy, but 10 off the top of my head are, I love home services businesses. So I own a bunch of those right now. There's this one here. This is Pink's, a window cleaning company. I own part of that company. So I like window cleaning. I like roofing. I like cleaning companies. I like landscaping companies. I like handyman companies. I like painting companies, rehab and addiction centers, single family, not huge centers, small ones. Same thing. I like that same thing for senior care, not a lot of inventory, but a lot of demand. I also like professional service businesses. So that would be businesses like accounting. If you're an attorney, a legal business, because only attorneys can buy legal businesses in the US. So you have a built-in moat. So home services, professional services are two of my favorite types of businesses to buy. And then I also think the more boring the business, the higher likelihood you're going to make money. So if you want to go buy an agency for Hollywood actors, that's probably really tough. You're going to have tiny little margins and a ton of competition. But if you want to go buy a porta potty sanitation company, you're probably going to have higher margins because you have less competition.
In a lot of your examples in the book, especially starting out, you recognize that marketing was your zone of genius. And for those listeners who maybe aren't in their ideal job and maybe they don't even know their zone of genius, is there some guidelines or some recommendations you can make to really figure out how they can find that unfair advantage if it's not obvious at first?
Yes. I mean, this is the most crucial part. We call it the deal clarity portion of business buying. And it's really important for you just in life to basically sit down and ask yourself, what do other people come to me for, even if it's not my job? So maybe that means that people ask you for branding advice consistently. They ask you to look at their accounting. When the check comes, everybody hands it to you because you're kind of the math guy, right? So you're starting to look at, okay, where are other people coming to me for things consistently? 2, what do you get paid for right now? What do you do right now? And how valuable is that skill set for you? 3, what would you do even if you didn't get paid for it? Like, what are you just obsessed with? Because obsession is hard to beat. And then 4, I like to think about what is your network in? So let's say you aren't great at math, but your husband is an accountant and he could be incredible at helping you analyze a business, but your benefits marketing, his is accounting, the two of you together have a pretty useful skill stack. So those were 4 questions I might start with if I wanted to figure out what type of business I should buy.
I know Johnny and I could speak to the downsides of partnership, but you mentioned in one of your answers that you've had businesses that you've invested in with other people, that you're partners in business. So how do you approach partnership if maybe you're too afraid to do it all on your own?
Well, 1, I love diversifying risk. So one of the best things that you can do when you buy a business is think about, how could I buy a business with as little of my own cash and time as possible? And you don't want to do unfair deals. You're not trying to take advantage of anybody, but you do want to try to think about, how can I not be fully on the hook? So if you're going out and buying a business, that's why I like things like seller financing, where the seller of the business allows you to use future profits to buy the business. I like SBA loans because the SBA can loan you some capital to buy the business. I also like thinking about, how can I do a deal where I might bring on third-party investors? So I might own most of the company, but I might say to John, like, Johnny, you look rich. You got any money that I could put into this business? And here's the return that I might give you. He's shaking his head. He's like, no. Oh, I think yes. Fireworks. And so you want to go and bring on some other people's capital sources. That allows you to diversify risk on your first deal. Likely, your first deal is not going to be your best deal. You're going to do more that are better and better as you get better at this. So I don't think you have to be greedy with the financials on the first one. That said, your biggest mistake in business is always going to be a who, not a how. And so be very careful with partners. I have a whole section in there dedicated to all the things I messed up with on partners. I have a whole section in there on how many people screwed me at different times, business speaking. And, the idea is really, if we're getting into business with somebody, one thing we know for certain is that probability is most businesses break up at some point. And so we got to start it with the end in mind, which means setting business expectations just like a prenup and a divorce.
Yeah, I know for us, we learned that lesson later, recognizing that we hadn't thought about the end in mind because we started pretty young and we were all excited at the beginning and we think all these strengths fit exactly the problem that we're trying to solve. But as a business grows, we've been around for 20 years, we've evolved quite a bit. And there's been times where my skill set was really applicable and then I didn't have the skills and we had to hire and we had partners who wanted to be involved and not want to be involved. And over time, you recognize just how difficult it can be, especially the more partners you add, to keep things afloat and keep things moving forward.
What's the best lesson you guys have learned on picking a partner in business?
Well, I think for us, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to label Johnny here. Maybe he has a different answer. But I think what I learned coming out of this experience was that A lot of times when you go in with the best intentions and you only focus on the positives and the skills, you don't think about how they handle conflict or what potential conflict amongst you would look like. That was a huge blind spot for me. So now when we have brought on partners or even joint ventures, the first thing we do with our lawyer is sit down and go, okay, how does this dissolve? And how does this dissolve without us being in a courtroom or a public fight or cash exchanging hands? Like, how do we make this that if it's not working for either one of us, we can go on our way and the business survives and those who want to stick around can stay and those who want to leave can leave happily? And we spent far too much time in front of lawyers and mediators and trying to duke it out. And unfortunately, if we were in that service-based business, I would love to be the lawyer on the other side because they're the ones who make all the money.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Yeah, I mean, I have like a whole section on it if people want to get crazy about it. And I think it's like sort of helpful to learn from other people's mistakes. So, wherever I can, I don't want to be the first person making the mistake. And thankfully, I don't think that really ever happens in acquisitions. But like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger have this funny saying, which basically, I think it was in one of their annual updates. And Munger was reading about a letter from Benjamin Franklin. And the letter from Benjamin Franklin was from like the 1700s. And he basically, it's like advice on getting a mistress, which is like not that appropriate today. But you wouldn't think that would be that applicable to a business partnership. And yet I thought the advice was so transcendent. He basically said, Benjamin Franklin in the letter said, if you're going to get a mistress, get an old one. She'll be more grateful. She'll also have more experience. And you're going to need it when you're starting out. And Munger and Buffett also talk about the fact that they both had experience in sectors that were totally different from each other. So one was an attorney, one was a deal guy, and they both were eternally grateful for having this partnership. And so I always liked that idea of if your partner is always kind of grateful for having the extra hand and you have a lot of experience in what you've done, that's a better outcome for a partnership. But that one always made me chuckle a little bit because I think it's true for mistresses and partners.
Well, that brings up a great point around that experience. So it's amazing that you set up this community that like-minded people who are thinking about buying a business or bought businesses can participate in. How do you view mentorship and seeking out support after you've made the leap and maybe you couldn't find that community or you don't have anyone internally in the business who can support you in that way?
I think you will not find a rich private equity guy that does deals by himself. It just doesn't exist. They all have a team around them that they do deals together. And I looked at that model and I said, why can't we replicate that in our community? So I think there's 3 things that you need to do a deal well. 1, you need that investor committee. And this is a group of people. We put people in cohorts. So they get together in a cohort of, let's call it 8 to 20 people, depending on the cohort size. And inside of that, you're going to have a few accountability buddies. You have a 2 to 3x higher likelihood of achieving an outcome if you're working on it with somebody else, from trainers all the way to deals. So you want to have this investment committee. The point of the investment committee is actually to do something called a deal review together. So it's just at bats. That's how you get better hitting a baseball. It's also how you get better at doing a deal. The problem is you can hit a baseball 1,000 times with no repercussions, so you can get the swings in yourself. When you're doing a deal, you literally just can't get enough deals done to get good at it. And so we do something called a deal review, which happens every Monday night. And people bring their deals to the call and we beat them up live. And we go, wait, this business says they make 50% profit in laundromats? No way. Those things make 15% profits. Let's dig into that. And when you have this collective group of people all beating up your deal, your likelihood of getting a good deal goes up. And then the third component of it is having a deal team. So your deal team is typically your accountant, your attorney, and a subject matter expert. So if I was going to buy a podcast, I'd probably want to spend some time talking to you guys. I'd want to spend some time talking to other people that had run a podcast. You would know how you make money. Is that reasonable? How much money they say? Is it actually as little work as they say it is? That's your subject matter expert. And typically in the community, there's one for everything. It's like, oh, you go to Robert, he bought landscaping companies. You go to Fred, he owns manufacturing companies. And then your attorney and your accountant are important because a lot of the money in deals is made on tax savings and also on structuring properly, like you said, making sure you control the downside. So we have a vendor database where people can share, I use this attorney, he was good, he was not so good. And you can steal other people's 10,000 hours again. That's sort of the the goal. There's like 11 million small businesses for sale right now in the US and Canada, which means we have so many more businesses for sale. Maybe some of them are jobs. Maybe some of them are not profitable businesses for sure, but we have so many more for sale. And every time one closes, I think it's a tragedy because there's some value there that's not getting transferred. And so whether it's a client list, whether it's a lease, whether it's office furniture, whether it's a few transactions every year and recurring revenue, let's transfer those from one entrepreneur to another instead of letting the big companies just continue to steal market share.
So with that, I think many of our listeners, I know from experience talking to them, they don't know of these databases. They don't know anything about buying businesses. So what are some of the ways that you found are successful in uncovering these gems? Because there are certainly websites you can Google where they're listed, but everyone's kind of picking through there. What are some of the gems that you found finding businesses that they might even not be for sale publicly, but that owner might be really happy with the right deal to let it go?
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons people don't go to buy a business is because they don't know where to find them. So I actually started looking aggressively, like how could we help people buy businesses and solve every issue in let's call it the supply chain of buying a business. So we bought a business called BizScout, which is a business buying and selling marketplace. And in it, there's two types of deals. There's one called off-market deals, where you could go in your area, AJ, and you'd be looking around in, I don't know, Los Angeles for a podcast production business. And you could see what are all the podcast studios located in Los Angeles. You could see what are all the video production studios located in Los Angeles. And then you could go and you could reach out to those people individually and you could see, hey, are they interested in selling their business? Those are called off-market deals. On-market deals, we have something like 68,000 listings on BizScout of businesses right now today that want to be sold. So that's like your Zillow, your Redfin for small business. You kind of got to cull through a bunch of trash. We're working on making that process better, but it's not perfect right now by far, to find your little diamond in the rough. And then the third way that we teach, and I talk about in the book quite a bit, is your center of influence strategy, which is like, you know how like before you got your first sponsorship deal for the podcast, you probably had other people that you could have gone to for sponsorship deals. You just like didn't know what that looked like. You didn't monetize it for a while. Now, typically what happens is when your opportunity is limited by your ability to see it. And most people cannot see the opportunity because they don't actually know how to define it. And so is it reasonable that before you got your first ad or sponsorship deal, let's say 5 years ago, for the other 15 years that you guys have been running the business, is it reasonable that there was nobody sponsoring podcasts? Like that didn't exist. That wasn't an option. Of course not. There are other people doing it. You just didn't know how to see the opportunity to go, oh, wait, this is the CEO of that company. Hey, can I talk to you for a second? You want to sponsor our podcast? And so it's kind of the same with doing deals. What you're going to start seeing when you learn how to become a deal is it's going to be like an iceberg where at the beginning, just a little tip stands out. So you're like, all right, I can go to BizScout and I can start searching businesses and I can see the businesses here. And then you're going to learn more. And so the water is going to recede until the iceberg is fully exposed. And you're like, holy crap, there's so many deals around me. Now it's just, I got to be selective on the right deal for me. And that is what I want for more people. And then they can sell their business to me when it gets bigger.
So what are some of the critical aspects of due diligence that you focus on to mitigate the risks when buying small businesses?
Yeah, well, we have a red flag section, which is really important. We want to make sure that when we see the opportunity, we know it. And when we see a potential problem, we also know it. And one of the first red flags is pretty straightforward, which is when an owner says something like, hey, the business isn't profitable now, but if you do these 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 things, it will be in the future. So you should probably buy this business today. It's there's all of this opportunity, but I just haven't had a chance. But if I had a chance, I made so much money. So no, we don't play that game. Another red flag is now you have to realize that business owners are running a business. They're busy. They're not going to be able to get you everything you want when you want it. And it's probably a bit of a mess, the financials in the back end. But you need somebody to play ball with you. So if the business owner is not willing to share their financials, if they don't want to share their tax returns, if they're not answering any of your questions, if they're saying like, oh, that's not important, or we'll get to that later, probably a red flag. Move on to a business that's a little bit more straightforward. They're ready to transact. The third that's most important to me is a line my dad said, which is you can't do a good deal with a bad guy. So for your first couple of deals, until you're really good, we just want to make sure that you like the seller. I want you to like the guy, and I want him to like you, and I want you guys to feel like you're going to have a relationship even after you buy the business. It's not a one-off transaction because you're going to miss things. You're not going to be able to find a password. You're going to have a door that's locked that you can't get into for some reason. And so you need that person to be invested in the success of the business even after they've sold it. Now, they don't have to work in the business even after they've sold it. That's unreasonable to think that they're still going to work hard. They won't. But you need them to care about you and the future of the business.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear the negotiation standpoint, because I think a lot of times we think of negotiation of the price is listed. Okay, maybe I can push back and forth on it, but I know there are creative ways, even if the price listed on BizScout seems really high, that you can find value. So how do you approach the negotiation once you've identified, researched, and now you're really excited about this opportunity?
Yeah. Well, here's a secret weapon for you if you want to negotiate down a business price. One is when you go to buy a house, what's the first thing your realtor does? He pulls comps, right? So here are the competitive houses that are in a similar area, size, style, etc. And so you can say, well, Mr. Seller of the house, I know you want $1 million, but everything around you is 250. So what's going on here? And so we have something at BizScout called Scout Sites. And basically what it is, it's like the Zestimate. You know how you have that at Zillow? It's like this house Zillow estimates is worth this. So we have a Scout site, which is really important because business data is not transparent. Like, you don't go around to your friends' businesses and go, hey, sup, Fred, how much money you make this year? Awesome. Like, I made this much. Yeah, revenue and bottom line. Let me just tell you the difference between the two. Of course not. And so businesses are the same. So we pulled a database of tens of thousands of businesses, and for equal size sector geography businesses, we have like some Scout sites, which is like recommended multiples. Oh, which I really like. And so that's one. You want to do competitive pricing. The second thing that's useful is to know this broad ranging valuation, which is most small businesses under $10 million in revenue sell for 2 to 3x profit, or what's called seller discretionary earnings, the money that the seller takes home. And if you go to Google right now and you search, what do small businesses sell for less than $10 million, you'll find this normal range. And so a thing you can do with sellers is say, hey, Mr. Seller of a business, I buy businesses like yours in this size, sector, geography. And typically, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Those businesses sell for somewhere around 2 to 3x profit. I'm sure you're familiar with that. You can show it to them like this. Now, of course, your business could be worth slightly more or less than this, but I just want us to be reasonable about it. So you're not thinking you get a 20x profit or something like that, because that's not what businesses of this size typically sell for. And so you can sort of price anchor people a little bit lower by just saying, I wish I could help, but like Velociraptor hands, it's out of my control. This is the market price.
I think the transition in ownership is another sticking point and concern. And I've heard horror stories of being excited. You bought this great HVAC company, 25 employees. They've been working there for 30 years. They love the owner. Now they don't want to show up and work for you. So what does that transition look like upon buying the business and the ownership actually changes? Because there's culture, there's obviously structure that's in place that you might not agree with, and you might think, oh, if we did it this way instead of that way, we'd be even more profitable. How do you approach that? And what does that period look like? Like, what are you looking for the transition to feel like it's going to be successful?
This is so important. I read this story, and I won't name the name of the company, but about a CEO that took over a company and got on Zoom after the acquisition and basically started talking about how, hey, at this company today, everybody has to come back into the office. 100% of employees have to work long hours continuously. Everybody's happy about it. In fact, Matt over there, he's so dedicated to the company that he actually gave up his brand new dog because he couldn't be there to take care of him. And that's the type of company we have. And he kind of quickly realized, that's probably not a great thing to say, that I'm making people give up lifelong pets in order to come back into the office. And so there was hysterically viral, they clipped this guy everywhere. And I don't think he lasted long at that company. And so I do think that People will remember what you said and how you made them feel when you take over a company. And it's super important when you take over a company that you know the current ownership and what is called the key men, the few people inside of the organization who drive the culture within the organization. It's not usually always the owner. There's usually in a company less than 10 million in revenue, let's say, somewhere between 3 and probably 8 people at the company that are core. They're like, there's the cheerleader, there's the executor, there's the wizard, there's the leader. And each of these individuals is somebody that you have to go get buy-in from. And this should be part of your transition and your offer docs. And you should say to the seller of the business, hey, I'm happy to pay your price if everything we find is right in the business. And if all your key men stay for X period of time and they don't have a fall in how much production they do. And so you're basically diversifying away from just the single seller. And a good seller will work with you on that because they'll say, oh yeah, Bob's amazing. Hey, Janet's kind of hard. So let's spend some time with Janet. Let's get her on board. Here's what she cares about. And that's the type of conversation you're going to want to have with the seller of the business.
Yeah, I think it's so key. I know we went through a little of that even with our acquisition, that it was just like a completely different environment and some people had to move fully remote and they weren't quite thrilled with that. And we didn't anticipate that in their conversation because we were so excited to get the IP and so excited to bring on what we thought would be this great product. And then we did lose some people along the way and it was frustrating not thinking about that.
I think in a business, we have something called downside cost calculators, which is basically I don't assume when I buy a business that I'm going to do a better job than the guy who's been running it for 11 years. I actually assume the opposite. I go, you know what? I bet the first year we're going to lose 20 to 30% from top line, from like what he did to what I did. Can the business sustain that? Am I still happy with the acquisition price if the business falls slightly? And so we have this little graphic that kind of shows you how much the business could lose and you could still be making money because that's going to happen. You're going to have maybe some employees leave, but you're probably going to have a few that you're like, you got to leave. Like you're not a great fit here. And so regardless of the two, you just want to make sure there's enough buffer that you don't really feel it. It's like if somebody punches you and you're wearing a sumo suit, you're like, yeah, that doesn't really bother me very much. And so we got to make sure we have enough fat in the sumo suit inside of the business for it to not bother us so much. And I think the main reason business transactions go wrong is they're too lean. Everything's just a little too tight and cash is king. Cash will protect you from a lot of hits.
I think in closing for our audience now that they're so excited to hear about these opportunities and to understand the ownership mindset, what are some mindsets that they need to start adopting to be successful in the ownership role?
Yeah, I mean, the best advice I ever got was from one of my mentors, Bill Perkins, who said, your bank account is a direct reflection of how fast you move, how much risk you take, and how much value you add. And so the faster you move, the more money that you make on average, as long as you are having positive action and learning from every single mistake. And I really took that to heart. And it's interesting. I had one of my old employees reach out to me yesterday. His name's Joe. He's great. And he was like, I learned a lot at your company, but the number one thing I learned was speed. And he's like, speed cures almost everything. And it drives employees crazy too. Because as founders, we're always like, faster, 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 right? And they're always like, we can't do more. We can't do more. We can't do more. And there's this like tension between the two. But once you've run a business, you realize that we don't have to be smarter. We don't have to be richer. We don't have to be better if we are faster. And so if you can decrease your speed to action, you can make a lot more money. And I think that is the main reason why people don't succeed in life. You don't have to go all in, but you do have to get started.
I love that advice, and I think it's a great place to wrap. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can our audience find out about the book and the community that you've built?
Well, thanks, guys. It's called Main Street Millionaire, and it's at msmbook.com or codiesanchez.com. And I'm on all the socials. And then if any of your people buy a business, I want to know, I want to hear about it. We have this little ticker scorecard where we tick every single person who buys a business, and then we count the total number of revenue dollars that they make. So that just makes me happy.
I love that. Thank you again for joining us. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.